Good morning, everyone. Happy Mother's Day, and we're pleased that you've joined us for worship this morning. We want to welcome especially those who may be visiting with us for the first time. Do we have any first-time visitors with us? We do. Could I ask you to take the courageous step, maybe to stand so we can see who you are and welcome you warmly? Welcome. Nice to have you with us. And we encourage everyone who's new to us, if you haven't done so as yet, to fill out a visitor's card. There are some in the pew, blue card. There's also some at the welcoming desk, and we'd be pleased to send our congregational newsletter on to you and assure you that you're welcome to all of the activities here at our congregation. And if you have questions about our congregation or Unitarian Universalism, I'll be pleased, along with our interim minister, Oscar Sinclair, and our Minister of Pastoral Care, Jennifer Brower, to answer them after the service. We'll be right out in the vestibule after the service this morning. There will be no usual UU Cafe after our service today. There's a Mother's Day brunch sponsored by our women's group. However, it was totally subscribed as of Thursday, and so there's no more room at the inn. So that is what will take place after the service today. Our 6th grade class will be selling Mother's Day flowers after the service in the vestibule, and the proceeds from that will go to their secret service project. And we'll find out what that secret service project is at Bridging Sunday on May 22nd. I want to remind you that there will be our Soulful Sundown this Friday evening, led by Reverend Brower. There'll be a light meal at 6:30, followed by service at 7:30, followed by a musical offering after that. So please be on hand on Friday evening. Now, next Sunday, I will be giving what is my final full-fledged sermon as a minister here. I've titled a Summing Up of 14 Years. I want to share with you what I think we have accomplished together, what we can celebrate together, some suggestions for the future of this congregation, but all in all, it'll be a very positive recounting of what we have accomplished together as a congregation and ministerial staff. So I'd be very pleased if you would be on hand for that next Sunday. And now, as is our custom, let's take a few moments to greet those seated near to us and warm welcome this morning.
Our opening words this morning are from Father Daniel Berrigan, who died last week in the Bronx at age 94. Daniel Berrigan was a Jesuit priest, a peace activist for much of his life, a personal hero of mine. "One is called to live nonviolently," he wrote, "even if the change one works for seems impossible. It may or may not be possible to turn the U.S. around through nonviolent revolution. But one thing favors such an attempt: the total inability of violence to change anything for the better." Will you please stand with me and join me in singing our opening hymn this morning, number 126, "Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing." And will you please join me in reciting the words of affirmation printed in your bulletin and perhaps written in your hearts. Love is the doctrine of this congregation. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve human need. This do we affirm and covenant with one another.
Thank you for that lovely Mother's Day piece. Let there be an offering now to sustain and to strengthen this congregation, which is sacred to us, a place of memory and hope. For all of us now are keepers of our dream of liberal religious faith. We wait upon you for your generous offering.
What a gift. Thank you, Sarah. You know, it's actually surprising that more ministers don't cry at the pulpit. Friends, I invite you to join now in the responsive reading that's been chosen for today's service. It's number 573 in the back of your hymnal. The words of Julia Ward Howe. As we have extended love and care to Sarah in her struggle there, this reading prompts us to extend love and care to others. Arise, then, women of this day.
Arise, all women who have hearts, whether your baptism be out of water or of fears.
Say firmly, we will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies.
Our husbands shall not come to us, weeping with carnage, for caresses and applause.
Our sons shall not be taken from us, to unlearn all that we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience.
We women of one country will be too tender of those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs.
From the bosom of the devastated earth, a voice goes up with our own. It says, disarm, disarm. As men have often forsaken the plow and the anvil at the summons of war, let women now leave all that may be left of home for a great and earnest day of counsel.
Let them meet first as women to bewail and commemorate the dead.
Let them then solemnly take counsel with each other as the means whereby the great human family can live in peace.
And each bury after her own time sacred day of rest, not of Caesar, but of God.
As you put away your hymnals, I invite you to take a moment to find a comfortable spot in that pew or that chair, to take a deep breath. To take a moment to slow our rushing thoughts, to focus on being nowhere but here, right now, fully present to this moment, to what we are building together in this service, the spirit of community and care and support that will extend out to the world. Holding each other in the holy quiet of this time, we turn our hearts to all the candles that have been lit this morning in our service. We know that that box made of wood and ceramic tile and filled with sand holds so much in those wax candles. Our worries, our fears, our sorrows, our hopes, our wonderings, our yearnings, our joys, our celebrations. So much is held in that box. We know that our lives are full of all kinds of experiences and feelings. There are folks we're worried about today. Let us bring them to mind. Hold a good thought for them. Maybe we're the ones who need the good thought. One name we lift up this morning is that of Anthony Sorolla, who spoke so eloquently in our service just a few weeks ago as he talked about his commitments to this congregation. Anthony has been hospitalized for the past 2 weeks. May we extend our care to him. On this day, when we are prompted to remember those who gave us life and nurtured our early years, we acknowledge that many among us carry feelings far more complicated than the florists and card sellers would have us believe. The relationship between mother and child is not always a vision of sweetness and light. Not all who have given birth or raised children had the resources they needed to be their best selves, to be their best mother. So let us extend a special prayer or affirmation for those whose feelings are complicated or conflicted, for those who feel hurt or disappointed, or would rather not remember their mother today. At the same time, let us remember with tenderness the mothers and mothering others who are departed, those gone from the life we know and understand, and those whose health prevents them from being in relationship with us now. We hold in prayerful embrace the children of all ages, whose absence is sharply felt on this day when the bond between mother and child is celebrated. Knowing that there are those in our midst who are marking a first Mother's Day without their mother or without their child, let us pray that they may be most tenderly held. Whether we have come into this day with a feeling of sadness or of great joy or something much more difficult to name, today may we grow in our awareness of and appreciation for life's gifts. May we marvel at the everyday miracles that surround us. Let us celebrate the great gift of friendship, of love, and new life. Let us give thanks for the babies birthed and adopted who were received by loving parents this year. And on this day, if no other, let us give deep thanks for each person, female or male, family or friend, who has loved us and affirmed our own true growing. May we find ways to express that love in words and through the deeds of our living, that we may offer the gifts of compassion and care and nurture to others. So may it be, and amen.
The first time I got up to preach at my home congregation in Baltimore, we were getting ready for the service to start, and the pianist came running over to me and said, "Do you have a glass of water?" And I said, "No, I don't think so." And he said, "Well, do you want one?" I said, "No, it's a 20-minute sermon. I should be able to get through that." And he said, "I'm going to get you a glass of water." And about 3 minutes into the sermon, my mouth went so dry, the sermon that I had practiced dozens of times into a mirror, I couldn't get the next word out. So since then, always a glass of water in the pulpit. Cheers. So here we are. I haven't actually preached here in several months. It's good to be back in this pulpit. It's good to be seeing you all from this vantage point again. And on Mother's Day, I should say in all candor that Mother's Day has a reputation as being one of the hardest Sundays to preach in the calendar. I'd like to thank my part of it might be all the reasons that Jennifer so eloquently put in her prayer. Part of it might be what a friend of mine posted on Facebook yesterday while writing a sermon for her church. She said, "On most Sundays I get the benefit of the doubt because everybody thinks I'm the expert on God or whatever I'm preaching about. On Mother's Day, though, well, everybody's an expert on Mother's Day." Part of this difficulty, too, is that mothers and motherhood can be complicated. For all the Hallmark cards, we know relationships between mothers and children that are difficult, that are damaging. Some of us have mothers that are living, some of us do not. Some of us are mothers ourselves, others not, through choice or otherwise. So I want to start with this acknowledgement. Mother's Day is hard. That said, I'm calling my mom this afternoon. Mother's Day, as we know it, was the brainchild of Anna Jarvis in the early years of the 20th century. Jarvis began with a yearly celebration of her mother, eventually expanding it into a celebration of all the members' mothers at her home Methodist church, then eventually advocating for it to be a state holiday, then eventually a federal holiday. Anna Jarvis's mother was, by all accounts, particularly her own, a force for good in her community and her family. And the holiday reflects that, in a way. Jarvis was explicit down to the grammar of Mother's Day. Mother's Day places the apostrophe after the R, but before the S. This is not a celebration of motherhood as a general state, but a celebration of each individual mother. It is Mother's Day, the day of my mother, your mother, all our mothers. And so it's a holiday for each individual mother to appreciate all that they give us. And after I leave Manhasset this afternoon, I will call my very individual mother to tell her that I love her and how much it means that she's part of my life. But Anna Jarvis was not the first one to advocate for a Mother's Day. That came 50 years earlier. We read a piece of Julia Ward Howe's Mother's Day Proclamation together this morning. In a bit of context, Julia Ward Howe was born in 1819, and by the 1860s had become a prominent member of Boston Unitarian Society, an abolitionist and a poet, albeit often an anonymous poet. Her husband, Samuel Howe, was one of the men who funded John Brown's raid at Harper Ferry. Julia Ward Howe was best known in her lifetime and now by lyrics she wrote in 1961 at the request of a Unitarian minister who felt that John Brown's Body is a Moldering in the Grave was not an appropriate enough song to go to war to, and so asked her to rewrite it. You might recognize it, and I think we'll have the choir sing a verse of it. So, that was the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And it became an instant success. It became a rallying cry throughout the Civil War. It's often sung as a hymn or a patriotic song now, and most of us know that first verse. But when you read the later verses, it is a little bit bloodthirsty. With a glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me, as he died to make man holy, let us die to make man free, while God is marching on. So it's remarkable to me that 10 years later, after the American Civil War and another war in Europe, the same poet that wrote, as he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free, came forth with, from the bosoms of the devastated earth, a voice goes up with our own. It says, disarm, disarm. The sword of murder is not the balance of justice. Blood does not wipe out dishonor, nor violence indicate possession. Same person. Battle Hymn of the Republic and the Mother's Day Proclamation. In the aftermath of the war she had so ardently supported, Howe was a pacifist, with a pacifism that was explicitly grounded in her motherhood. Motherhood to Howe was what would tie together women of warring nations to say no more, gathering together to end the conflicts their husbands and sons seemed so intent on fighting. Howe's call for peace was international in flavor. She proposed a Congress of Women to meet in London to work for peace between the nations of the world, as well as proposing that a Mother's Day for Peace be recognized every year on June 2nd. While Howe's June 2nd holiday never fully materialized, and Mother's Day does not now have the international flavor of her proposal, there are echoes of it in other celebrations. Every March, there's an International Women's Day. This year, several of us were in Haiti to sit in on celebrations for Women's Day, and justice and equality was the heart of the thing there. A call for justice that came out of the shared experience of being women and mothers in the world. This seems, to me, a very UU way of thinking about Mother's Day. I've mentioned before that I came to Unitarian Universalism in the early 2000s. And it's strange to think now that our country has been at war in some form for the last 15 years. But then it felt new. And in 2001, I learned to protest the war from the church moms in Binghamton. Doris Jones was one of those mothers for me. Doris was in her early 80s when I knew her, a longtime member of the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Binghamton, and a longtime activist in peace causes. Between seemingly weekly protests in Binghamton, introducing teenagers at her church to the writings of Daniel and Philip Berrigan, and writing more letters to the editor that I thought humanly possible, she made a point every year to travel to Fort Benning, Georgia, where she protested the School for the Americas. The School for the Americas, now renamed the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation, trained and trains members of militaries throughout the Western Hemisphere. In the 80s and 90s, graduates of the school were implicated in war crimes, often associated with guerrilla wars against communist insurgencies. And so there are yearly peace protests at the School for the Americas. Every year, people gather at the gates of Fort Benning to protest the proliferation of violence in the world and what they see as our country's role in it. And each year, Doris would go down to be part of the protest. And these protests are carefully choreographed, as most civil disobedience is. There's a line at Fort Benning. And as long as you're protesting on this side of the line, you're a citizen exercising your free speech rights to speak and protest. But as soon as you step over the literal line, you're trespassing on U.S. military property, and you are arrested. And each year, a few protesters step over the line, knowing the consequences of their actions as an expression of civil disobedience. And in the time that I knew her, each year, Doris stepped over the line and then came back to Binghamton incensed. Because it turns out none of the MPs would arrest somebody that looked like their grandmother. The story goes that one year, one of the MPs simply picked her up and put her back on the right side of the line and said, "Oh, I didn't see, what?" Doris was finally arrested in 2003. This was a cause of great rejoicing for her, only to be frustrated again at her trial when the judge decided to give her a year's probation rather than the jail sentence she was hoping for. Doris Jones is part of a long tradition in Unitarian Universalism. Now, we are not a peace church as traditionally defined. It's clearly possible, common, probable, to be a Unitarian Universalist and not be a pacifist. Our movement has passionately debated the role of war and faith in every generation since Julia Ward Howe's Mother's Day Declaration. In her later years, Howe often wrote for Unity magazine, the publication most closely associated with the Midwestern branch of Unitarianism. Unity and its editor took a strong position against the First World War, so strong, in fact, that the post office took it upon itself to prevent distribution of the magazine in 1918. In World War II, Unity was put in a difficult position. There were two editors by that point, and they were divided on the question of pacifism. They debated openly in the pages of the magazine. The editor, John Haynes Holmes, was one of the major pacifist voices in America and Unitarianism, had been for 30 years. and proposed in 1939 to make unity an instrument of that pacifism. The managing editor, Curtis Reese, himself a founding figure in Unitarian humanism, did not share Holmes's sentiments, writing at one point, "We in America are not exempt from this choice between democracy and totalitarianism. And the real question is whether we are for democracy with its tradition of power derived from the people and exercised with regard to constitutionally guaranteed liberties, or for the totalitarian system with its arbitrary power exercised without regard for liberties of any sort. I do not think there is much doubt about where the American people stand." Reese was no pacifist. Holmes, minister at New York's own community church, wrote in the first issue of Unity, published after the United States entered World War II, 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor, "And now what shall the pacifists do? The answer is easy: stand fast by principle and carry on. This does not mean opposition or interference with war activities. I agree absolutely that we will not oppose, obstruct, or interfere with officials, soldiers, or citizens in performance of that they regard as their patriotic duty, but it does not mean that the exercise of the full freedom established in a democracy to voice honest opinion, to be loyal to fixed conviction, and to advance the eternal cause of peace and brotherhood." While Unity had ceased publishing by the time of the Vietnam War, that war too was debated, sometimes bitterly, in Unitarian Universalist congregations, with members of goodwill on both sides of the issue. I imagine we'll debate the role of pacifism in our movement as long as our country goes to war. And I imagine that will be a long time. Still, for me, every Mother's Day feels connected to the peace witness in Unitarian Universalism, the sixth principle that calls us to the goal of world community, to the office we have at the UN, to the peace poles that grace so many of our congregational buildings. Maybe this is not the Mother's Day of Ann Jarvis. This is not the Mother's Day of handcrafted cards brought home from school, of carnations and of brunches. I think there's room for both, though. There's some irony in this for me, because when I call my mother this afternoon, I'll tell her about preaching this sermon in a Unitarian Universalist congregation, and I'll have that conversation with my mother, who left Unitarian Universalism a dozen years ago, who left in part because she felt that our congregation didn't take a strong enough stand for peace and against war. My mother is a powerful personality. She's visited here a few times, and if you've met her, you might be able to imagine her echoing Julia Ward Howe. "Our husbands shall not come to us, reeking with carnage for caresses and applause. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have taught them of charity, mercy, and patience." To be sure, not all mothers are pacifists. Not all pacifists are mothers. And there are as many ways of celebrating this day as there are families. For me, though, this holiday is always, in part, a remembrance of all the mothers, from Julia Ward Howe to Doris Jones to my own mother, who have said no more. Put down the swords, put down the guns, stop fighting, live in peace. May it be so. Will you please rise as you're comfortable and join me in singing our closing hymn, number 168, One More Step. So let us go forth from this place in celebration, in remembrance, in all the complicated ways that this day lives in our lives. Go in peace, go in kindness, go in love, go in faith. Amen.